Sure thing. The Twitch URL is it should just be Wit Game Dev, right?
Correct. It's
It's in the general.
twitch.tv/witgamedevelopment.
There you go. Oh, Wit. All right. So let's just the stream is up and
Stream's
everything.
live.
Okay. Sounds good.
We're at 0 viewers currently. I have the chat up on my other monitor though, so we should be good.
Awesome.
Oh, TARDIS Lover is now following you on Twitch.
Yeah, that's my friend Gabe.
Nice.
He wanted to watch some of it.
I really like this PowerPoint template that I kind of just like blatantly stole from Unreal Engine or from Epic
Sure.
Games.
That's theirs, but it looks really nice and it looks very Unreal because that's the text they always use for stuff.
Yeah, it's called Euro style.
That's the name of the text.
Yeah,
That's the font.
it's EUROSTILE.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Oh, we
gonna
got 2 viewers.
2.
Yep.
Let
Send a message to the chat.
I also just joined just to check it out, just to see. Yeah, cool. So I got the PowerPoint there. You're just messaging the chat room.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll send that same message to Slack.
Sure. I was just gonna message the general chat now.
Perfect. I will send that message telling people just to ask questions through their Slack.
Sure.
Trying to get all these windows up.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Two people viewing at the moment.
So, are you still viewing or no?
Well, yeah, I just had the stream open.
Okay. Oh no, there's 3 now.
But I'm not logged in, so it shouldn't count it.
Oh, it still counts it. It counts it by IP.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I have this recording too, which is
yeah,
great
that's what I'm
because
saying. It doesn't matter much if we have everybody watching live. We just want to make sure we have it recorded, and then everyone can see it.
Alrighty, so I'll just get started. Hey guys. So today we're gonna do our Git workshop. A lot of you have probably dealt with some sort of version control in the past, but if you haven't, it's basically a way to save progress on a project over time in the form of versions. I know it's kind of obvious, but essentially you make changes to your project over time and it saves each individual change as something called a commit that we'll talk about later. And that commit allows you to, if you then have problems down the line with your project or with one of your changes not really agreeing with another one, you can downgrade your project and it makes it a lot easier to fix errors as opposed to finding where the error is in the current version, you can just go back and figure out where it started. So
Yep. All right.
so
Have you moved on to the next slide there on the PowerPoint?
Yep, we're good. You can start.
All right, cool. So let's discuss a bit about, so you just sort of went into what version control is and why we use it. Another reason for version control is also that it allows for multiple people to work on the same project simultaneously from a distance without interfering with each other's work. And this is the primary way of doing so, is using version control. So it's not just for making previous versions, although that is a big bonus of it. You're each going to be working in something called a branch, which we'll talk about a little later. And essentially, it lets you have your own testing area where you can make stuff, work on your own version of the project, and then only take the files that you either created or changed, or the levels, say, that you made or something, and put those into the master, back into the master project, which is the main branch, the main file. So we'll go into some of the terminology now. The terminology is basic, but it's pretty important. So yeah, we'll move on to next slide here.
It's up.
So,
The
yeah.
stream's a couple seconds behind.
Yeah, no worries. So the main thing is the repository. So the repository is essentially just the centralized folder tree. That's where all the folders for your project are. It'll be hosted on GitHub's website. And then also when you download the desktop client, it'll also be there as well. And this is where, in your repository is where all the files are for your project, but it will also be the place where GitHub is going to recognize any of the changes that you make within your branch. So if you change a file that is outside of your repository, it's not going to record in the history of your changes. But if you change them within your repository, then it will. So the next step down the line is the branch. So when you have a GitHub project, and we'll show you in the demo a little later, but when you have a GitHub project and you're going to be working in your own branch, which is your own section of the GitHub. So it's a little confusing conceptually. But when you create the project, it starts off with a single branch called the master branch. Now, this is something that is going to be your official version of the project. It's not going to be, you're not going to work in the master at all. This is just the overall version that everybody has. So if you look on the right, the master branch would be where Mike is sort of circling. That is the starting point. That is the main vertical branch that stays straight. And when you want to work on your own thing, so say you want to add a health system, you would create your own separate branch, which is this offshoot to the right here that he's labeling, and you would call that branch, say, health bar or health system. And now what it will do is that it will record these changes on your local machine, and when any additions you make, it's going to store those changes without affecting the main branch. That's the important part. So the main version of the game is not going to be affected when you work in your own branch. So you can totally, so say if you get really far in your branch and you end up breaking everything and it's just not functional anymore, you could just either go to a previous commit like Mike was talking about, or you can just delete the whole branch entirely and make a new branch from the master and start fresh for free. So it really saves you a ton of time and headache for sure. Now, merging is the next piece of this. So actually, I'll take a quick step back. So when you're in a branch, you see where the bolded word commit there. So this is something that'll be a little easier to conceive of when we show it visually, when we do a demo in a second. But essentially, when you make changes, it'll record those changes. But if you want to save them as like a snapshot, so all right, this is going to be a little bit of a specific reference, but if you use an emulator and you play games like a Game Boy emulator or something, and you create a save state where it takes a snapshot of essentially exactly where you are at that moment of time, that's what a commit is. And you can use those commits to go back in time in your project to any point. So you want to commit those changes to tell it, yes, I want you to save these changes that I made. Or you can discard any changes that you didn't want to have saved either.
It's kind of
Now,
like if you've
after,
ever used track changes in Microsoft Word, where you can
right,
actually see all of the revisions you've made over time, step by step.
definitely. That's exactly what it is. So now, when you want to merge back into the master, this means that you are now going to take the changes that you made. You think they're fine, you're done making them, and you're going to put those into the main project that everybody's going to be working in. And that is what's known as merging. Now, if you are the project owner, you can merge directly into the master without any issue. However, this is terrible practice. You always, especially if you're working on a team, you want to click a button, what's called a pull request, and that pull request essentially notifies your whole team on GitHub saying, "Hey, my changes are done. I would like to merge this into the master. Please review it." And actually, when you look on GitHub, you can look through your friends' codes or your teammates' codes, any other file changes, anything that's in there. It'll tell you what was taken out in red, what was added in is in green, and you can review all the changes. And if it looks good, like it's not going to break anything, then you can click the merge button, and your branch will be fused back into the master. Only the changes that you made. So it's not going to overwrite all the other project files. It's only going to do the changes that you worked on.
I can actually
Now,
show this one right here and see.
yeah,
You just pull this over.
Mike can show you really quick what this looks like.
So
Um,
this is a pull request on my team's project, and essentially it says all of the changed files right here. It's 186 changed files, 40,000 additions, and 39,716 deletions. So you can actually go through all of the files that have changed, and if it's a Git LFS file, it's not going to show. But if you code in C++, it'll actually show you the line by line differences.
yeah, and that's super useful down the road if anyone's interested in learning C++. It's a lot easier to solve these kind of conflicts you might have, which we'll go into what conflicts are in a second. But yeah, because when you merge into the master now, if two people worked on the same exact thing and they have different versions essentially of that same object, so say we have this player character and Mike worked on the player and I also worked on the player, but say he called his health variable health and I called it hit points, that would create a merge conflict because each of us, like the master, has something different. So like Mike's version, which let's say is the master in this case, is different from what I have, even though we both worked on the same. So since we both worked on the same thing, and we essentially have to tell GitHub which of those two things we want, which one's correct, and it'll either overwrite the original or it will discard the change and you keep the original. So you definitely want to be really careful when doing this kind of stuff with merging because it can get really dicey really quickly. Inevitably, you're going to have merge conflicts at some point, and knowing how to solve them without deleting old work or getting rid of stuff is really important. So yeah, we can move on now, I think. Yeah, next slide.
Yep.
Cool. So this is something we talked about already with the committing. Staging. So this one works a little better with the visual, which we'll show you in a second once we get to like the setup and the interface and everything. But essentially, staging lists all of the commits that all the changes that you want to commit are the ones they are staged is the term. So when you have GitHub Desktop, you'll essentially see a list of all of your changes, and they are currently staged, as in they are ready to commit. And you can pick and choose which ones you actually want to commit to your branch. Now, once you've committed your changes, you want to. So if you're working on the desktop, you want to publish your branch. So essentially, that's where the pushing comes in, and it's slightly different from committing, where you will click a button to publish your branch to the online server.
Your audio is kind of cutting out.
Oh, it's cutting out. Can you still hear
Yeah.
me?
Here, we might want to join an actual Discord channel because this is peer-to-peer and that might be the problem.
Okay.
Hold on,
Okay.
let me sorry about this, guys. Here, hold on 1 second. I will send you an invite. Let's see.
I mean, Wentworth is kind of weird with peer-to-peer connections. That's why if you play Overwatch, you can't use voice chat at one. All
There you go.
right, so I'm going to leave this call and I'm going to join the test server.
Okay.
Hello?
Yep. Hello?
How's the audio?
No, it didn't get better. Let me try turning the bitrate of the channel down. Might be too high. Okay, try now.
Hello?
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 Okay, that's better.
Awesome. So yeah, I think we can move on now to some of the installation. The installation is super easy. This one we can actually probably blow through relatively quickly.
Okay.
Um,
So essentially, one of the main dependencies of using Git version control is, of course, the Git exe file that's going to allow your computer to actually store these changes and commits. So you would download Git from gitscm.com. You just open that up. Let me just pull it up really quick. Open it up,
this also works on Mac. It doesn't necessarily have to be an exe file, but
and uh, I'm not sure if this is correct for every single time, but I've downloaded on PC and Mac, and every time the latest source release has agreed with my current OS. And if that doesn't work, then you can go to the Downloads tab and then click your version. Like if I was on Windows, I click right here, and I would just make sure that it downloads the right version, whether I'm 32-bit or 64-bit.
gotcha. Cool.
And
See it.
after that, you need to download a GUI for it because I don't think anyone wants to type in some Linux commands to use version control because that's a little tedious.
Right. So when you download Git, it essentially you don't need to touch the file unless you're planning on either working from terminal or the command prompt. So this is going to get a little computer sciencey, but essentially when you download Git, it gives you a library to work with within a bash. So your bash could be terminal or command prompt or some other shell that you want to use. Or you could do the easy way like we do and use the GitHub desktop, which requires no code, no nothing. It's just going to be menus and buttons like
Yeah,
any other
it's a
software.
much similar or it's a much simpler GUI form of Git, so it makes it a lot easier. If you haven't had an experience with Git Bash before, it's definitely it's definitely the better option. It's much more straightforward. There's less having to scrape the internet for the Git API to figure out how to push or pull. And when it comes to command line Git, there's so many different little errors you can make especially if you like don't know how to make an SSH key, because if you use SSH versus HTTPS, you can't commit as, or no, you can commit bigger files, but if you use HTTPS, you can commit smaller files. So I would definitely recommend using GitHub Desktop as
Yeah.
opposed to Git Bash.
GitHub Desktop just does a ton of the work for you. But you just go to that website, desktop.github.com, and there should be a button on the home page just for downloading the client. And if
And
you
if
want
it
to,
doesn't give you the right OS, you can just click download for Windows right below it.
right,
So I'm going to, should I go through the next slides or should I just open it up on, open up the
you can
application
just
and show
you
you?
don't have to download it yourself. You can just
Yeah. Oh, I
open
already
it. I
have
think,
it.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can just
Yeah.
open up, just show them what it looks like.
Yeah. 1 second. There we go. So I recently deleted all my repositories off here so I could demo it from the version you would get. So essentially the first step is you go to your preferences or your settings, depending on which OS you're on, and you need to sign into your GitHub account. So I'm just going to do that.
Right. So that is another part of this. So when you make a GitHub repository, you actually want to go to github.com, make an account, and then once you make an account on github.com, you can create a repository on the website. And that's sort of like the first part of this is going to be. Um, so Mike can just quickly show you
So
just what github.com looks like.
now that oh, github.com. 1 second.
Because you can create, so the desktop client, everything is going to be completely local. But if you want to actually get the folder tree from the website, you have to create it online first and then download
So
it.
an example of a GitHub project, it would look something like this, where it has all of your different folders for your
Nice
project.
profile.
Thank you. Uh, and it shows all of your commits and branches for each individual part of your project and all the changes you've made and all the changes your teammates have made. So right here, this is my initial commit where I post my skeleton code to the master, and then my teammates then can branch off of that. So as you see, like this is Ryan right here making some basic tweaks and putting that to his branch. And then you can see right here, I did a bunch of UI edits to my branch right here. And then I did a merge pull request to pull that to the master.
So this is all online, and the way that you actually get the download is that if you go near the top where it says to clone the project on the main page. So if you want to go onto like the main project page, and there should be a where it says clone or download.
Yeah.
You want to take that HTTPS, copy that to your clipboard, and then you want to open it in the desktop client. So I
And then
believe,
you
yeah, I think
clone
when you go to the
repository.
desktop, yeah, then you can go to on the right to clone repository.
You can clone from a URL, but if you're using GitHub Desktop as opposed to another Git GUI, once you log in with GitHub, you can just select from the projects that are shared with you.
That's
So,
true. It should tell you the repositories that are shared with you.
so
Um,
right here, as you can see, I could either put in the link to my RPG game right here, or I could go to my RPG right here, and it already exists, so it's not going to let me do that. So I need to add a local repository and find that.
right. So usually, if it says the folder is still there, then you'd have to delete the folder.
Yeah, let me just
Um,
open it up right here though.
right. Yeah.
And see, these are all of the changes that have been made. See, this is something that we can get into a little bit later in the presentation where
Mm-hmm.
my gitignore doesn't include .log. So all of these log files think that because they've been changed, they want to post them to GitHub. But in reality, you aren't going to want to upload a ton of logs just because they're kind of going to be local dependent, meaning that your log is going to be only relevant to your edition of the project. So
Right.
if I'm working with my team and I upload my changes, they aren't going to want my logs because they can just take my files and run them and they'll have their own logs. So it's definitely a way to conserve a lot of space and conserve bandwidth when you're committing your files.
Definitely. So we'll get into the git ignore, but now just so you can get an idea of the interface here. So if you look on the left-hand side, that's that list that we were talking about of your changes. So those are, if you on the far left, those are the staged change where it says 17 changed files. Those are all the staged changes, and you can click on each one, and it will show you on the right-hand side. So these are just log files, so they're kind of useless information for now. But that's what was actually changed, is all that red stuff on the right. If you look to the bottom, whenever you make a commit, you give it a title, and then you give it a description. So it's kind of like when you save a file, you might save multiple versions of that same file, and you would give each a different name. So for like this, you could say like initial commit, or you could say, at this, so for say if you're doing the health and you make a variable for the health, and you can say like, oh, health variable. I mean, you just commit that variable. Then you could say you wrote the actual script for it, and then you can write health script as the title, and then the description would just be like, took the health variable and put it in the health script. So you want to be very descriptive with your commits, so that way you know exactly what the history of your branch is. And that way when your teammates read it, they don't have to scan through all of your code to know what's going on. They can kind of look at the description and get an idea of what you're doing. It's kind of like commenting your code.
Yeah, it's definitely a very good habit to get into, to have detailed and descriptive commit messages. Your title isn't as important. It can just be a general idea of what you did. Like if you made a new widget and you were doing some tweaks with it, it should just be UI tweaks, and then you describe in detail in the description. Because
Right.
when your teammates are looking at your commit, they're not going to want to have to fetch your branch to know what you did. They're going to want to know directly from the commit message.
Definitely. So yeah, so that's a lot of the very basics of the setup here and some of the interface. When you want to actually commit, you just click that commit button. And then if you look at the top, it'll tell you on the left your current repository. Sorry, if you just go back to that the desktop real quick.
Yeah.
Right. So you see on the upper left-hand corner, you've got the current repository that you're working in. The right next to it, you see the current branch that you're working in. And then on the right, it's where it says fetch origin. Now, fetching the origin is just going to any updates that are merged into the master. If you click fetch origin, it'll try to put it into your project if there's no merge conflicts.
And then this button right here for fetch origin, if you have a commit that's already made, so let's just say commit.
Right. So
and then it's deleting a U asset that we're no longer using. So I'm just gonna say and then I commit it, and it shows up right here, committed just now, commit to delete, and then this turns into a push button, so you can push whatever changes you made to your branch.
So right, so it says push to origin. So now you can click that, and that push will put it, because right now locally it is saved the commit, but you want it to go online. So when you push to origin, it's going to make sure your whole team can see the commit and that it's officially part of the
and then when you go onto GitHub, it says right here, you recently pushed branches, Mike branch, less than a minute ago. And so this branch right here is not currently connected to the master. So it's saying, do you want to pull it to the master? And this would be where you would create a pull request and your teammates would review it. So here you can select any of your teammates and they have to review it and agree before you end up merging them.
Right.
One of the very convenient parts about GitHub, though, is that it does automatically scan between the two and look for deltas or changes between the two of them, where two files don't agree with each other, like Bobby was saying with the health variables that are named differently. And if it sees that, it knows that those files can't merge cleanly, at least. So one of them is going to have to overwrite the other. So it would say unable to merge, and it would show you where the conflict is.
Right. So here it'll detect it. So when you create a pull request, your whole team can review it. You can write comments on the code. And then if it's good to go, then you can merge it in after that review process. But that review process is like really important. So creating a pull request is just you telling your team, hey, our changes are ready to go. Please take a look. And then yeah, then the last bit of it will just be merging into the master. And then when you're ready to make more changes, you make more branches. Now, we will talk a little bit about, so Mike can talk a little bit about doing the UE4 teams sort of stuff. So working on your, like directly in Unreal Engine with your team, right?
Okay, yeah. So
Uh,
I'm going to do this by means of a demo because I feel like that's the best way to fully understand how the process works. So to start off, obviously, we're going to open up Unreal Engine. So let me just get it launched right now. And let's see, library, and we're going to open just a random template. And we're going to end up connecting that with GitHub.
yep. And we'll go through some of the, at the very end, we'll go through some of the best practices.
Yeah.
Because there are some really very simple things that will really help you get GitHub up and running and functional.
For sure.
And these best practices save you a ton of time and headache because as powerful as GitHub is, it can very, very quickly also destroy your project. Or if you accidentally revert a commit or you accidentally make all these changes and you made them all in the master instead of making them in your own branch and you didn't want those to be in the master, it's really can be tough to revert some of those changes or like any of these kind of things. So
Okay.
following our best practices will really help you from making those kind of mistakes.
So this project has no link with any source control yet. Everything is going to be step by step from the way you would have it when you open up Unreal. So
And source control is just another word for version control.
So essentially the first step is to go up to source control in the top, right click on it, and press connect to source control. And here you're going to need to select Git beta version and your Git path. This is going to be the path to your exe. So actually, I don't know where mine is, so I have to go find that. Give me 1 second. Normally it fills it up for you. That's weird. I'll open up Eclipse and it'll tell me. But essentially, it needs the path to your Git exe so it can do all of the default changes that you would need through the bash. So it knows all the commands it needs to type to push and pull and commit to the origin. So it makes it a lot easier for you to not have to deal with that.
Very much so. Oh god, I think I had like Eclipse Neon for like most of my time here at Wentworth, never getting oxygen until like a week ago.
Let's see. Here we go. Git. Found it. Oh wait, no, that's not it. Well, here, I'll do it the non-Unreal way, because that's the way my team does it anyways. We just do it as a project folder, and then push it to the origin based through GitHub Desktop. So.
Yeah, so it's just something to keep in mind that Unreal Engine, it has the integration if you want to use it where it can help you do it a little more cleanly than working with the files. You can like directly, so like your character, you can modify that and it'll automatically do your sort of Git, it'll handle a lot of the Git stuff for you. If you make an object, it'll automatically do a lot of the Git stuff for you. Doing it directly in the folder tree works too. You just have to be a little more careful with some of the file control.
It's
But
just more so that you need to be careful about your git ignore so you don't end up posting logs and binaries and stuff
right.
that doesn't really affect your version of the project. So when I show this folder, I have it right here. It's under my project. So I'm going to want to do whatever you would need to do to find the path of this. So it's going to be different on Mac and PC, obviously. So I'm going to copy this path right here. If you were on Windows, this would be in your System Explorer. You would need to right-click, and I think it's also Get Info or it's Properties.
Yeah, I think
And
if you hold Option, if you hold on a Mac, if you hold Option and right-click the folder while you're right-clicking, it should give you just copy path.
okay.
Um,
So, and then once you do that, you're going to want to open up GitHub Desktop again right here. And you're going to want to go File and New Repository. If you do add local repository, it's going to look for one that's already been initialized with Git, so you don't want that. What you want is you want to just be able to put in your path right here. Okay, that's good. Apparently that doesn't work. So I'll just go to my documents and Unreal Projects. It's my project. And just press open. So I'm going to name this new project. It's giving me a warning that it's going to be created as new dash project because there's no spaces. And then description. It asks me if I want to initialize this with a README. So if you're posting this on GitHub as public and you want other people to be able to understand what your project is, that's very convenient. It asks if you want a default git ignore. I always set this to none so I can make my own git ignore because I don't think there is one for Unreal Engine specifically. Oh, there is right here. Wow.
mm-hmm.
So I'll try that out and see what that does.
Yeah, sometimes you can create a custom one. Otherwise, you just make your own. And a git ignore will just essentially, if you notice, the logs all have the same file extension. So say if every time you made changes in your level, it made changes, it would say like library slash and then all this random mumbo jumbo, and you're like, well, every one of these starts with library slash. So I'm in my git ignore, I'm just gonna type in like library slash, so that way anything that has this file extension is not going to show up. Or you can do the same thing with file endings. You can do it with there's a bunch of different ways you can use git ignore, and it just helps you so that way your GitHub essentially knows what it should not be looking at.
Alrighty. So essentially, once you get your project open in GitHub Desktop, the first step is to commit your initial commit or to publish your initial commit. So you press
Yep.
publish repository. Here's your name and your description. They make sure you want that exactly because you can change it through GitHub's website, but it's a lot easier just to get it to what you want it to be at the beginning.
Yep.
So then you press publish.
And
then it should appear on my profile.
Yep. So if you look at his profile, it should be right there.
There we go. New project updated 10 seconds ago. Right here.
Yep.
And right now it just has the git ignore and the git attributes because we haven't made any changes to the project yet, so it hasn't posted them.
Right. So yeah, that's most of what you need to know in terms of the basics of working with GitHub and working with it in Unreal Engine. Obviously, if you have questions or something, we can go into more of the specifics of like setting up git ignores for Unreal, or if you want to work more directly in Unreal instead of just in the folder tree, you can also reach out to us for that. The last thing we'll talk about really quick are just a few of the best practices. So the best practices that we've sort of lined out here. So the first and foremost, the most important one is to never, ever work directly in the master. This is super, super important. So the master branch is something that unless you are merging your own personal branch into the master, you don't want to change it because this is the working copy that everybody has. And essentially, if you're testing something and you're accidentally working in the master and you end up breaking things, you're breaking the project for everybody, not just yourself. And it's really hard to revert the master back to previous versions. So definitely make sure that whenever you're working, you're always working your own thing. You're leaving the master branch alone. Now, the next step is sort of related, but always have your team review your pull request before merging into the master. This is just it helps your team to keep track of what's going into the project. It also helps your team keep track, like if there are any mistakes, you can catch them before you put in. So if your mistake might not be a merge conflict, but say something that you were going to put in would actually break some of the code, or because someone else merged something into the project after or before you did, and your code might conflict with theirs, not in a merge conflict kind of way, but like it might still break things. So you still want to look at it and make sure everything's okay first. And the last step is sort of what we talked about, where you want to figure out exactly what you need for your git ignore. You do not commit everything that's going to be in there, because when you're working in a game engine, the way that it actually keeps track of the positions of everything and where things are in your level is it will create a lot of what it's called metadata, which are essentially glorified text files that contain just the data of the locations and statuses of all these different things. And when you're working on a project, odds are you're not always going to be working with specific level placement. You will be placing things in your level to test, don't get me wrong, but when you're working on, say, your character, you're going to be only wanting to upload, say if you're working on a specific piece of code for the character, you only want to upload that code. Or if you're working on the model, you only want to upload that model. You don't want to upload their location in the scene. You don't want to upload, like, if you moved the location of some of the blueprint nodes within the node editor, that's kind of like a useless thing to upload. So there's going to be like hundreds and hundreds of files that you don't actually want to be uploading. You only want to be uploading what you're working with, and that's why the git ignore is such a time saver, because instead of having to pour over like hundreds of files figuring out just which ones are yours, you can just set it up to ignore all of this kind of crazy metadata that you don't need
A great
necessarily.
example of this is like, let me just pull up my actual team's project. As you can see here, this is like the actual content folder, where this is where all of the like assets that are actually used in the game are stored. So these are where all our blueprints, all of our animation blueprints, all of our blend spaces, everything that makes our mechanics of our game and our animation and like the actual visuals of the game work is in this folder. But as you can see, it's not the only folder, and it's probably not the biggest either. And saved, it backs up literally everything. So if you're uploading your editor cooked right here, it's uploading all of the builds you've made for your game. So all of the executables for Android, for HTML5, for iOS, for Mac, for tvOS, all of those take up space and they're completely useless to the other programmers on your team. So you're not going to want that to be cluttering up your Git, because then when you end up having a merge conflict a couple months down the line, and you're like, oh, why am I having conflicts with these two builds? And it's probably because there's a conflict with your code deeper down, but it's also noticing the conflict in your executable because they can't be merged together because it's two separate executables with conflicting code.
Right.
So yeah.
Definitely. So
So
yeah, no, that's definitely a solid example. And yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end of the presentation here. Um, I want to thank those who were able to watch. Sorry we weren't able to do this one in person today. We had a lot of people that had conflicting schedules, especially within our directors today. It was a bit of a busy weekend. but we figured from remotely we could do this presentation, and then we will be posting an edited version of this online, such that everybody can view it. So yeah, that's sort of what we're going to be working in. We'll post this online shortly, so everybody can take a look. Mike, do you have any final notes?
This will be immediately on the Twitch page for the next 14 days. Twitch stores it, and sometime in the next week, I will have the edited version up on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions at all, you can ask them either here now, through Slack, or you can hold them until the stand-up, or, I mean, you can reach out to me and Bobby, either way. We're
Yep.
always willing to answer questions. That's not just for this. Yeah, so that's about it. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. From what I can see, uh, I think the only people on the stream right now are myself and my friend here. So I think we can probably cut the questions for now, and we will, we'll post the video online as soon as it's ready on YouTube, and we'll let everyone know.
Alrighty.
And obviously we can edit this portion out.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. I know this is more Ryan and Giga's deal. I don't know why Giga was looking for apartments today, and I guess Ryan had a stomachache or something.
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on,
such
but
is life.
I'll talk to them. Yeah, but yeah, thanks so much for doing this, and yeah, we will catch up soon.
Okay, have a good
All right,
day.
you too. Peace.